Welcome everyone to the very first event in our 2022 BAD Online International Writers Festival. My name is Catherine Dupoulou-Ménager and I'm the Artistic Director of BAD. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country, wherever we all are in Australia. We acknowledge their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Today, I'm speaking from Camaragal country. Now, there is no better person to start an international festival than Adrian McKinty, because he is international. So he grew up in Northern Ireland, he went to university in England, he lived in the USA, then I saw that he lived in Israel, and then he went to Australia, lived in Melbourne, and now he's back in the USA. So I hope I haven't left out any countries, but that's pretty international. Yes. Adrian, you won more awards than most people have even heard of, including the Ned Kelly Awards, and we may mention that later. So look, a great welcome back to Australia, even if only virtually, and thank you for joining us to kick off the festival.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor.
Well, it's a great pleasure for us. Now, Tim, who's going to be interviewing Adrian today, is a man of many parts. When he isn't at the ABC, being the managing editor of television and video for ABC News, or when he isn't biking, or when he isn't surfing, he actually writes great thrillers himself. He's written 3 fantastic books starring foreign correspondent John Bailey, and they are, if you haven't read them yet, you should do that. And they're being adapted for the screen, so that's really good. He also regularly interviews other crime writers at writers' festivals, including at BAD. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we start the interview, I want to thank our sponsors, the City of Sydney and Create New South Wales. We would not be here without you, so many thanks. We also have a relationship with Booktopia, and we appreciate their support. So you can go there to buy Adrian's book. Just click on the buy a book link on our website, and it will take you straight there. I'd like to welcome all members of the BAD community, wherever you're watching from, and particularly viewers from public libraries, and for the first time, viewers from libraries in Brisbane, where apparently Adrian has often spoken, so he thinks he might know you guys, or certainly where you've been. Yes. So it's great fun to be going interstate. Now, very briefly, I'm going to disappear very soon, leave Adrian and Tim to chat, then I'll come back at the end to say thank you. Let's go, Tim.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and really thrilled to be interviewing you today, Adrian. Really enjoy your writing. But I've got a bit of a beef with you. I think the world needs a break right now, and a dream on a nice little island is where most people think they're going to take their families. And then I read this.
Yes, it's not a nice break. It's not a nice holiday. No.
Look, it's an absolute thrilling ride. I really enjoyed it. So why don't you just for those that are familiar with your work, but this book's your latest one, obviously, but tell us a little bit about the island.
Well, I can sort of tell you the origin story if you want about how
yeah.
Sure. So I was writing a book called The Chain, and it came out about 2.5 years ago. And my last event for The Chain was at the Norwegian Crime Festival in Oslo. And I was there in March of 2020. And I remember my wife calling me up and said, Adrian, you got to get home. They're closing the airports. The New York City public schools are closing tomorrow. And I go, what's going on? And she said, don't you pay attention to the news? There's COVID-19. You've got to get back. You've got to get back. And so I flew back the next day, and I arrived at JFK, and security measures at JFK were very strict. There was a guy at the airport saying, have you just come in from China? And if you said yes, you got disappeared off to this little room. I don't know what happened to you. And if you said no, they let you back into the country as a potential patient zero. And then the word went back online, don't say you've just come in from China. And so, of course, I did not, but I also hadn't come in from China. So I arrived in New York City, and then lockdown began, and the kids were off school. My wife was a teacher. She had to teach from home, and all the kids were stuck at home with us. And that's when my writer's block began, and it continued for about the next 6 or 7 months, where I just wasn't writing anything because the kids were on Zoom school all day long, and then the teachers were giving them tons of homework, and that was lasting until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I was knackered at the end of the day. And so, I knew I'd signed a 2-book deal with Hachette, and every few weeks my editor would call me up and say, so how's the new book coming along? And I, of course, would give the answer, it's going great. It's going absolutely great. It's fabulous. I have so many great ideas. I just don't know which one of these ponies to put all my money on, because they're all so brilliant. But you can lie to your editor, but you can never lie to your agent. And so my agent would call me up and I go, oh man, I've got nothing. I've got absolutely just nothing at all. And he was going, well, you got to think of something. You signed a contract. And I go, I know I signed a contract. So this went on for about 7 months of the kids are home. I'm exhausted. I'm writing nothing. There's just nothing going on. And my agent stopped calling me to nag me and started calling me as a therapist. And he would just call and we would talk about films. Especially, I have a love for 1970s films. And so we started talking about all these movies from the 70s that I absolutely adored. And then the conversation comes around Deliverance, and I say to him, because I've read the book and watched the film, and I love both. I love the book and the film, both a little bit different. James Dickey's novel is very poetic, and the film is more sort of hardcore, and it's got these gritty 70s ideas and values and stuff like that. And I said, Shane, who's my agent, I said, I had my own kind of deliverance moment about 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm not really sure if it was in my head or it was a real thing or not. And he said, oh, what was that? And I said, well, obviously we lived in Melbourne for a decade. And as soon as we arrived in Melbourne, my wife, who's a little bit more cultured than I am, she wanted to go to the Sydney Opera House, and the kids wanted to see, the Wiggles. And all I wanted to do was go to the place where they filmed Mad Max, and which I did the first weekend, which is just about an hour north of Melbourne. And if you go up another 6 hours north, you get into the territory, Broken Hill, which is where they filmed Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, which is awesome. It's just brilliant up there. So I would always take the kids on these trips, just anywhere within a day's drive of Melbourne, we'd go. And there's a very famous island, everybody knows about it, south of Melbourne, called Phillips Island, where they have the Penguin Parade, and they get 1 million tourists a year. And so I didn't want to go there, but I noticed that there was this other island, just a little bit further along from Phillips Island, where nobody went to. And in the book, it's called Dutch Island. I think everybody in Melbourne knows the place I'm talking about, but I don't want to mention its name because I'm sure the people on it are lovely. I'm just going to say that right up front. I'm sure they're absolutely lovely people, and the stuff that happens has nothing to do with them. This is a fictionalized version of a real place. I got to say that. But so we drove down there, and we got the ferry over to this little island, and it was a bit odd from the get-go, in that sort of cool Aussie way. The guy taking us over on the ferry was driving it with his bare foot while he was drinking a can of beer. And this is after he'd pointed out to us that these were shark-infested waters. He told us that it was filled with blue sharks and tiger sharks and bull sharks. And I was just going, maybe you should be steering it with, both hands, if that's the case, in case there's a capsize or something. But anyway, so we land on this island, and it's Valentine's Day, or a day before Valentine's Day. And so it's about 42 degrees Celsius. And, it's hot. It's hot. It's from Northern Ireland, anything above 25 degrees Celsius is the surface of the sun for me. So this was 42. This was beyond a joke. And so we're driving around this island, and it's a bit of a weird vibe because the very first thing we see is a couple of guys with shotguns broken up over their shoulders, walking around, and then we start hearing. And I've never seen that anywhere in Australia before, because obviously Australia very strict gun controls. I've never seen long guns in Australia ever. Occasionally you'll see a cop with a sidearm, but you'll never see anyone carrying long guns. It's unheard of. And so this was odd. And we'd hear gunfire, and it turned out that what was happening was that they were extirpating the local rabbit population. But so it was just an odd thing to see, the guys with the guns, and then to hear all the gunfire. Yeah. And we drive to this little farm to get something, and there's nothing to see. The kids are bored out of their minds, and there's no phone service, there's no internet, so they're just on these portable DVD players things, or they've stuff stored on their. They're not even looking out the window anymore, because it's just this tall spinifex on either side of the road. So I'm driving around trying to pretend that this was a worthwhile trip, and it's not. And we come to this farm, and then the oddness goes up a notch, because everybody at the farm knows who we are, and they know we've come from Melbourne, and they know everything about us, because the guy on the ferry has walkie-talkied ahead and told them. And then there's a couple more little odd things where there's a lot of guys just hanging around, and one of the guys makes an off-color remark about one of my daughters that my wife hears, and it's not. And so Leah, my wife, just says to me, "Adrian, can we go? Can we just go?" And I sort of have to admit failure, that this trip has been a fiasco. And I look at my watch, and it's about 3:10. And the guy in the ferry has been real clear to us. And he said, "You've got to be back by 3:30, because I don't take anybody back across after 3:30. Yeah. I just don't." And I look at my watch and I go, "Oh my God, it's 3:10. So kids. So I bundle everybody in the car, and I floor it, and I just floor it back towards the ferry. And I'm really panicking, because I don't want to have to spend the night in the car, on this island, with all this sort of weirdness. So I floor it, and I'm driving around. I don't know what speed, but I'm really going far too fast for these roads. And then out of the spinifex, out of the tall grass on the left-hand side, a woman comes out of the car, on a bicycle, and she's got a hearing aid in and connected to her back, and she comes right in front of us. And either the battery has gone, or it's not plugged in or something, because I honk the horn and slam on the brakes, and she's like here, and we're like here, and it just goes, and we stop maybe 10 meters behind where she is, and she continues right on down the road, totally oblivious, doesn't know that we were there, or doesn't know anything was happening. And I'm shaking, and I'm just sitting there, hands on the steering wheel, trembling, as you do with any kind of car accident. It's obviously very traumatic, and as a joke to break the tension, I said to my wife, I said, if we'd hit her, we wouldn't have got off this island alive. And she perfectly seriously says to me, "I don't think we would have." And so cut to 2 years later, and I'm telling this story to my agent in New York after like 6 months of writer's block. And my agent says, "Oh, McKinty, you idiot. You did hit her. That's the next book." And I thought about it for about 15 seconds and thought, yeah, we hit her. That's the whole book. The whole book right there.
Yeah, it's, I mean, what a great teaser for the book as well. You throw in a murderous family, a few sharks and snakes, and you've got a hell of a scary ride.
That's what you need.
Not really a tourism ad for Australia, I've got to say. but a hell of a ride.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about that I noticed sort of sprinkled through the book is your nod to Indigenous Australians as well.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a really nice touch, I thought. But I just wanted it was obviously important to you to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It really was. I mean, I'm not criticizing any other writers at all. Every writer has their own vision and tells their own story, and should tell their own story in their own way. But I sometimes get a little bit frustrated because when I was in Australia, I read a lot of Australian fiction, and sometimes I would get a little bit frustrated by writers describing a landscape as empty or as deserted or as barren or as there's no one here at all. And I would find that a little bit frustrating because I would think, so, well, it's not really empty or barren or deserted. There's a culture here going back tens of thousands of years, which did exist and which does exist and will exist again in the future. And so I thought it was quite important for me to say, well, here we are out in the, out in the bush, out in the outland, out in the wilds, but this is by no means an empty place, and it's by no means a place without a culture. In fact, there was a very, very rich and deep and textured culture, and it still exists.
Yeah. That idea of sense of place, and I should have said, actually, I know you spent a lot of your time in Melbourne living in St Kilda. I spent almost a decade living in Melbourne and St Kilda as well.
Whereabouts were you in Melbourne, if you don't mind me asking? Whereabouts, what suburb? What suburb?
I was in St Kilda.
Oh, really? What street?
On Ackland Street, just down, literally down from the junction. There's an apartment building there, just down from the junction. With
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I used to live on. Do you know where the peanut farm? Yeah, I just lived off that.
Right on the just sort of the Elwood end.
Yeah. So we were about 6 minutes walk away.
Yeah. Good one. Well, it's a great part of the world.
It's a fantastic part of the world.
Obviously, ruined now because of the murderous people on the island just down the road. But jokes. But look, that idea of sense of place, and which is why I mentioned St Kilda and Melbourne as well. And I know with your writing, and I've read some of your earlier books as well, sense of place is really important to a story. Let's talk a little bit more about that. And I love what you said there about how we could think a little bit, have a slightly longer view of history than 200 years when we're thinking about the places in which we write. But then, the contemporary setting is super important as well. So how do you go about that when you're writing?
Well, I mean, this was very, very difficult for me. This was only the second thriller I'd ever written. The Chain was my first thriller. And this is only the second thriller. And previously, I mean, as you know, if you've read some of the other ones, all I'd ever written before were noirs.
Yeah.
And noir writing is very different from thriller writing, because in a noir, it's really about mood and atmosphere and character development. And sometimes in a noir, even the plot isn't that important, the story, because you're giving a sense of place. And I wrote 6 Sean Duffy novels set in Belfast in the 80s, and really the story was kind of the excuse to hang out in that world. And so I would do outrageous things where I would have Sean, who's my lead character, listening to I don't know, like Exile on Main Street for 3 pages and criticizing it track by track while he's drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes and looking out the window at the rain. And that is fantastic about setting up atmosphere. And so that completely captures a mood. You've got the music, you've got the weather, you've got what he's drinking, and you've got what he's smoking, so you've got all mood. But my God, you can't get away with that in a thriller. Because in a thriller, the reader's going, "What the hell are you doing? you need to be, stop. You're not listening to records. What on earth? What the hell?
The gun outside.
Yeah. Just get on with it." And so in a noir, it's easy to establish place and character and atmosphere and mood. But in a thriller, it's so much harder, because basically every page has to be doing one or 2 things. It either has to be developing character or turning a wheel of the story. And it's a lot more economical writing. And so I found it, I guess with more experienced thriller writers can do it easier than I did. I found it quite hard to get in a sense of place and a sense of atmosphere. And I always was trying to kind of sneak it in throughout the story. And I thought, I really want to do 2 or 3 pages of description here, but I know I can't. But maybe I can squeeze in a paragraph here, and so I was always trying to get it in a way that I find really easy to do in a noir, but this required a bit more ingenuity to get away with it.
Which style? Because you do have now, you've mastered 2 distinctive styles.
Oh, thank you.
Winning awards for both, I should say. So, which style do you enjoy writing most?
I definitely enjoy writing the noirs because you can just you can give free rein to your worst instincts. And like if you had a problem, like if I had a problem with the Led Zeppelin album Coda, I can have Duffy have a conversation in a bar while he's chatting up a suspect, and then they go around to talking about the album Coda. And Duffy will say something, that all that material is outtakes that should never have been released. It's an embarrassment as a record. And then the other guy can say, oh, well, that's a good song, blah, blah, blah. And so I can get at all these demons, which have haunted me for decades, and all these complaints about music and films and TV. And there's a lot of criticism, unfair criticism of U2. And I can just get it all out there on the page. Whereas in a thriller, my God, you can't get away with that. You've just got to be more disciplined and more economical. So in a way, it forces you to be a better writer in some respects, but it's definitely harder and not as much fun to actually write.
And of course, your criticism of, whether it's the Stones or U2, that's Sean Duffy. That's not you. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was on book tour last week, and someone said to me, why do you hate Bono so much? And I said, mate, that's not me. That's Sean. I said, I may or may not hate Bono. I may think he's taken Irish taxpayers for a ride for the last 2 decades by setting up his limited company in Holland and only paying 10% taxes in Holland, in the Netherlands. But that I don't have that opinion. That would be Sean.
Sean's good at calling that stuff out. He's
not me.
The brutal truth. I should declare also, and I hadn't read your earlier stuff before I started writing my first book, because Exile on Main Street is my protagonist, John Bailey's favorite album.
Right, exactly. But don't you think it's a little bit too flabby, or are you just on board for the whole thing?
Oh, look, I feel maybe. Look, there's probably a couple of songs in there. Like, look, Midnight Oil's latest album is unbelievably good. It's right up there with their 80s stuff. There's one song on the end of the album that I think, why'd you put it there? It just did not be there. But anyway, I digress away. But look,
digression is good. Digression is good. I remember Sean went on a 2-page rant about Robert Plant's solo albums, and my editor said to me, "Does this have to be in here?" And I said, "It doesn't have to be, but it's fun." And she went, "Okay, we'll keep it." Nothing has to be in there, but it's
Yeah. So look, going back, I want to talk a little bit more about process and things, but also the types of what you can actually do with a book too. And I think back to Rain Dogs and how you have that like beautiful, pages to open the book about Ali, and then it talk about racism and the Troubles and everything. Where do you think with fiction, it's a bizarre thing to say, but I always ask writers when I'm talking about it, but it allows you to get, much closer to the truth in many ways, doesn't it? Because it allows you, I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, no, that's absolutely fantastic. And you nailed me completely, because Muhammad Ali never came to Belfast in real life. He came to Dublin 4 times, and he went out to his ancestral home. His great-grandfather, I think, came from County Clare, came from Ennis in County Clare. Yeah. And so he went in a pilgrimage to his great-great-grandfather's hometown. And famously, I mean, everybody came out to see him and to touch him and all that kind of stuff. And I had an incident which moved me deeply in real life with Muhammad Ali. And when I was at university, he came to, he was, getting up there, and his Parkinson's was quite severe. And I think he was actually a few years from death, but he came to launch a book of photographs. in this bookstore near my uni, and I thought, oh my God, I gotta go see. So I was in the front row, and it was in the UK, and the place was full of British hacks from all these newspapers who hadn't seen Ali for a long time. They hadn't seen him for about a decade. And so a lot of them were really shocked because they remembered the fast talking lippy guy who was always on Parkinson and just had, so to see this trembling old man to be up there with gray hair, and there was just gasps when he came out, and the most amazing thing happened, and they started talking about this book of photographs, of Ali, and I don't think Ali was actually doing the talking. I think it was the photographer was doing the talking, and then it's one of the hacks, these hard-bitten tabloid journalists in Britain. One of them in the front row was crying. He just went, "You're the greatest champ," and Muhammad Ali, and he was always wearing those tracksuits, those like shell suits in those days. He reached into his pocket, trembling, and he pulled out a £5 note, and he reached across, and then he winked at everyone, and he said, "I told him to say that." And the place just went bananas. Like everyone was just crying, laughing. He still had it. He's slowed down by age and disease, but the champ still had it. And everyone was so happy. And I thought to myself, okay, I've got this Duffy novel. There's absolutely no reason why Muhammad Ali should be in this book at all. It's unnecessary, but I want to take that moment, which really happened to me and possibly could have happened to my protagonist, and put that at the very beginning of the book, because I think it tells this. It's not strictly true. It didn't actually happen, but I think it tells a wider, I don't know what you call it, emotional truth about this person and their magnetism and their charisma and their power, and how they, were able to change people's lives. So all that stuff is made up, but it's kind of not. It's sort of all kind of emotionally true, all the stuff that happens at the beginning of Rain Dogs. So I had a blast, and all throughout, I have to tell you, all throughout the editing process of that book, I was so scared. I was so scared when it went to the editor. She's going to say, "Oh, book is fine, cut chapter 1." And then I thought, when it goes to her boss, I thought, I'm going to get the same question. They're going to say, "Book is fine, cut chapter 1." And then it goes to the proofreader and the copy editor. And I was just fingers crossed. I was going, please God, don't let them make me cut it, because I really don't want to. And all the way through, I guarded that chapter, and they kept it. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of in my entire life, that I made it all up. None of it actually happened, but in a sort of way, if there was an alternative Earth, you could totally imagine it happening for real.
Well, that's it, isn't it? That's why. And look, it was beautifully written and really just gripped me. Like you say that you're allowed to go in your tangents and stuff when you're doing noir, but you write well, people are staying with you for the journey. And the beauty of that, and what you were talking about then, is in an alternative universe. Well, absolutely. But there was so much truth in all of the words. So, that idea of has happened, could happen, or will happen is for me really strong in that. Well done. Just sticking with that theme, I'm going to come back to the book in a minute. It's a cracker.
Sure.
But I just want to, sticking with that theme of how real life can inform our writing as well. I'm interested in how you're seeing the world at the moment. I mean, there's a couple of mass shootings in America the last couple of weeks. We're seeing this sort of rise in nationalism and more inward focus from nations and governments, and you're seeing that in the people, right? Like, so I lead this question, I guess, over to America. You're away from America for a while, for quite a long time, and then you've come back. What's your view on living in America right now? And I ask you because writers are the great observers, really, aren't you? So what's your view?
Yeah, well, it's such a bizarre place of contrast, because there's real darkness here. There's absolutely real darkness. I think on the extreme right, there's so much darkness and paranoia, and people who think that the government is out to get them, and they think that or the world is out to get them, and they don't believe in, they think that COVID isn't real and none of that's happened. And you always want to say, well, yeah, you're entitled to your beliefs, But I mean, you really, if your beliefs are that non-mainstream, it's really worthwhile, researching where you got your beliefs from. And I'm not saying I have the right answers or anything, but I like to take a diversity of viewpoints, and I also like to be proved wrong. I mean, if you've got a different viewpoint than me, I love it when people, are able to say, we don't agree with that. So on the one hand, there's that absolute darkness. But on the other hand, I just come back from like a 10-day book tour, I guess what you would describe into the heartland of the US.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have, I mean, obviously it's a book tour and people are going to be nice, but I couldn't have met with just nicer, kinder people. And every event I went to, people brought me like Guinness and soda bread and just all this stuff. And I thought to myself, there are crazy people out there who hog the news and hog the limelight, but maybe I'm naive, but I like to believe that most people are fundamentally just decent and kind and good. And although the nutters and the angry people always catch the headlines, I think, I like to believe that that's a really small minority. So I don't know. Maybe I'm naive. I don't know, but I like to believe that I'm not. Or I hope I'm not.
Yeah, look, and I want to believe that. I want to believe that too. And look, sometimes I'm a glass half full guy. I've seen the election in Australia has really been a fascinating result recently, where we've got a parliament full of independents and people that are going to hopefully talk to each other a bit more, a bit more of a civil way. I interviewed Brian Brown not long ago. He's written a book of short stories, and he's much older and wiser than you and I. And one thing he said, reflecting on that, he said that somehow we've just forgotten how to disagree with each other.
Right.
We've forgotten to have these conversations. Like, just because we disagree doesn't mean I hate you.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. It's like, your footy team. You're not going to be angry because somebody has a different footy team. It's just that's their thing, and you've got your thing, and then after the game is over you can have a drink together. And I wish politics was a lot more like that. You've got your system of beliefs, I've got my system of beliefs, but at the end of the day we can go to the bar and maybe have a talk about it, or talk about something else. Go and talk about our kids or the weather or whatever.
Find that common ground, and then you realize we're not so different, you and I. I can't remember who said that. So you mentioned COVID earlier as well. A lot of writers have grappled with that. Do I include it in the book? Do I not? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, that was a complete nightmare, a complete and utter nightmare, whether to mention it or not, because I really listened to a lot of music, and I found that there were a lot of musical references in the book, and the musical references were coming from bands that came from 2020 or 2021. And then then after the book was done, I thought to myself, well, hold on, if these bands are from 2020 or 2021, wouldn't that be during COVID? And so it can't be 2020 or 21 because no one's mentioned COVID in the story. And then I thought, well, how early can I go? Maybe it's post-COVID. It was a bloody nightmare, because I'd made the decision not to talk about it. But then that throws up all these other questions. Well, when is it? If it's not 20 or 21 or early 22, when is this book taking place? So you're in a minefield either way.
You are. And also, I think readers and people are just sick of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Have it too heavy in a book, then they're like, oh, no, I want to escape. And this is not helping me. Yeah.
Like they made I saw a couple of COVID films. There was a COVID heist movie I saw, and there's this film by Ben Wheatley, who I normally love, and it was like a COVID parable set in a forest, and I had to turn them off both after 15 minutes because I thought, oh, I'm so sick of this. I don't want to hear about this anymore.
Yeah, me too. Although I'd say one writer I thought actually did it really well in a recent book, maybe it's one late last year or this year, Michael Connolly, I can't remember the name of the one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was actually part of the story and talking about how people mask wearing and sneering at people for wearing masks or not wearing masks, and that whole,
Well, I mean, it would make doing a heist a lot easier, I guess. If everybody's wearing masks all the time, then your bank robbery novel is gonna have a better, easier start. I think that's one less obstacle.
That's the COVID book. That's the COVID book to write.
Yeah.
So I once heard an interview. I'd love two crime writers and a microphone. Steve Cavanaugh, Vesti. They're great, funny guys. They've disappeared for a year, I've got to say. Hopefully they come back. But you know what it's like being a writer. You're alone at home, with your thoughts. So I listen to some podcasts. It gives you a bit of company, and you listen to other writers and their journeys. I listened when they had you on. You're talking about plot, and you talked about that a little bit earlier. How do you plot? How do you, I know you said it's a challenge because obviously there was a 7-month period until you had the epiphany.
Yeah.
But how do you go about, do you plot before you write, or do you?
Well, I've been thinking, if we've got 2 hours, I've been thinking a lot about this because I had a really weird experience. I think it must have been in 2019, right at the end of the year, where I had to do 2 newspaper interviews in 2 days with, I think on the Monday, I interviewed Lee Child, and on the Thursday, I interviewed James Ellroy.
Yeah.
And they have utterly diametrically opposite styles.
Yes.
So Lee Child does not believe in plotting anything. He thinks that destroys the creative process, and that what you do is you don't even think about the book. And what you do is you write your 800 words, and then you're done for the day. And then you go off, and he's got a lot of guitarists. He plays his guitars, goes for a walk. I don't know what he's doing, but then he comes back the next morning, and then he reads what he's written so far, and he goes, okay, I get it. And then he writes another 800 words, and then he goes off again. And then that's how he builds a book. And then I remember, I'll never forget this. I said to him, yes, that's all well and good. But then in that second draft, then you fix everything. And you go back, and then you layer all these things in, and you do all this. And he goes, no, there's no second draft. He said, that's it. He says, there's just copy editing and proofreading. And I was going, what? So there's zero planning whatsoever, which almost made my head explode. And I thought, well, maybe he's just got a steel trap brain, and it's doing all the work subconsciously. I don't know, but anyway, so that was his approach, and I asked him. I mean, I got real nerdy on that. And I asked him about 5 or 6 questions on that to make sure he wasn't just yanking my chain. But no, that's completely legit. And then on the Thursday, I interviewed Ellroy, and I'm talking to him about his process, and I was saying, no, I've heard you've got an interesting process. And interesting was code word for eccentric, because this is what I'd heard, and I said. And he said, what have you heard? And I said, well, I've heard that you get a plan. It's about 500 pages long, and you get the plan bound into a book. And then when you've got this 500-page long plan, which you've written in longhand, then you open up this is what I'd heard. And then you open up the book, and then you write it longhand. And then this is the bit that always gets me. And then you send it out to a typist. Like it's 1946, and you send it out to a typist who types it up for you and sends it back, and then you correct the typewritten pages.
Wow.
And I was kind of scared to bring this up with Ellroy. He's a big guy, by the way. So I was a little bit intimidated by him, and he's a giant. But he said, yeah, that's exactly my process. And he said, whoever told you that, they're 100% accurate. I write a 500-page plan in longhand, and then I write chapters in longhand, get them typed up, correct the typed pages, and then move on to the next chapter, following the plan rigorously. And in fact, Ellroy said to me, would you like to see the plan of my next book? And so he reached into his bicycle messenger bag, and he showed me, sure enough, it's this bound gigantic volume filled with spidery script for hundreds of pages of plan, which presumably he can read. I found it quite difficult to read. And then he just sits down and or does this and then works on it every day. And I think for lesser mortals who are not Lee Child or James Elroy, it's somewhere in between those two processes. There's a little bit of planning, and then there's a little bit of seat of the pants, and then some more planning. Maybe So so I was always in between those two things. The elaborate plan or the seat of the pants. Except for two occasions where I did write 2 locked room mysteries. And I wrote a locked room mystery called In the Morning I'll Be Gone, and I wrote another one called Rain Dogs. And for those, I found that I had to plan those quite rigorously first, because in a locked room mystery, it's got rules and you got to stick to those rules. And the rules are, you got to give the clues to the reader as you're going along so they can solve it at the end. And if you're a writer and you don't do that, the reader's allowed to come and clip you around the back of the head, because that's not fair and you're not following the rules. So for those, except for those 2 books, which I did a fairly rigorous, maybe 15 or 20 page plan. The rest of it was somewhere in between the two crazy processes.
The did she fall or was she pushed?
Exactly.
The sprinkling hints. Good one. That's really interesting to hear. So now coming back to you, the chain as well, the chain almost didn't happen, did it? And so a lot of people may not be familiar with your kind of journey as a writer, and you had a bit of a moment where you're thinking, oh, am I going to keep doing this? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'd been plugging away at it. Well, we lived in Denver for many years, and I was a school teacher, and my wife is a school teacher, and we're making a good living. But I was writing books as a sideline, and then she got offered a job in Melbourne, and she took it, and I thought, well, this is my big moment to follow my dream and write full time. And we moved to Melbourne, and it was wonderful. We lived in the greatest suburb, St Kilda, of the greatest city on earth, in my humble opinion. We lived in St Kilda, and we raised our kids there, and our kids went to St Kilda Primary, and we loved it. But the whole time we were there, we were sort of broke. It's quite an expensive place to live if you're, especially living on one salary, which we were, because my books weren't. It's funny. I won the Ned Kelly Award 3 times, but I never sold more than like 2,000 copies in a year, and at $1 a copy, I never made enough money to ever pay federal taxes in Australia, because they have that threshold that if you don't get past the threshold, you don't have to pay tax. So I never paid taxes. Not because I'm a tax cheat, but because I never made enough money. And like push came to shove, I remember we ended up such a night. We were living in rented accommodation all over the place. And I remember we got evicted from our last home, and it was just one of those things where you just have like a come to Jesus moment. I thought, McKinty, what the hell are you doing with your life? Your wife is working fingers to the bone. She's been providing this income for the whole family, for both of you, and you've just been living this completely inauthentic, fake life as this celebrated writer, but you're not actually doing anything for your family. So I announced on my blog that I was putting writing aside for a couple of years, and I was going to go back to getting a day job, getting my teaching certification, working at a bar, just whatever. And then bizarrely, I get a call about 2 weeks later from Don Winslow. And he says, the American crime writer Don Winslow, and he says to me, I read your blog and I was in exactly the same position as you 4 years ago. I had to put my son through college, and all my books had been well regarded, well reviewed, but no one bought them. And this was just before, and I decided to quit. And he had been a tour guide in East Africa doing safaris and well paid. I decided I was going to go back to doing that, and so I basically quit. And then my buddy, this agent called Shane Salerno, said, Don, the problem with you isn't your books, it's the marketing of your books. We just have to find a better way of marketing your books. And that was right before his biggest success, The Cartel, which became, massive world bestseller. And he said to me, I think this is the same situation with you. So then his buddy Shane Salerno called me up. I don't think he quite understood Australian time zones, because he called me up about 12:30 at night. I don't know what that time was in California, but it was rather late where I was. And after a lot of resistance about taking the phone call in the first place, he said to me, look, Adrian, is there this book that you've just been afraid to write or didn't want to write? And that's sort of where he got me in the convo, because there was. And I said, actually, there is. There's this book that it's got a really scary premise, and I've actually been too scared to write it. And he said, what's the premise? And I said, a mother, her child is kidnapped, and the only way she can get it back is to kidnap someone else's child, because they've been abducted into this evil entity called the Chain, which just likes to keep this serial kidnapping going. And Shane said to me, that's the one. That's the one. He says, I'll get you on the New York Times bestseller list and we'll sell it to Hollywood. And I said, no, you won't. And
all that happened.
And a year and a half later, the bastard got me on the New York Times bestseller list, and he bloody sold it to Hollywood. So, if you ever get a phone call from Shane Salerno at 12:30 at night, take that phone call and listen to that agent, because he might be talking a lot of sense. So that basically turned everything around for me. And then I decided maybe this. I mean, I'm really cagey talking about money, because that's never the reason why you should go into writing. You should go into writing because you want to tell stories. That's the reason you should become a writer, is because you've got this burning desire to tell stories. But the problem becomes if you're a working class kid like me, and you also have to provide for your family, then how do you balance that out? If you want to tell stories for a living, but you just can't make a living at it, that's where all the complications sort of come in, and you have to sort of think about that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. We're all so glad that you kept at it, because The Chain and The Island are fantastic reads. One thing that's in common with both of those books is your really strong female protagonists. Let's talk a little bit about that, because they are the real heroines of the book, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up in Belfast in the 70s, and have you seen Ken Branagh's Belfast? No, so Ken Branagh, it got
it's recently just come out, hasn't it?
It just came out. Got knocked for an Oscar, and I think he won Best Original Screenplay. And but what was really interesting about that movie was how much of the life is dominated by women, because the men were always out looking for work. And so it was the women who held the families together there. So if you were a kid who grew up in the 70s and 80s, you usually had these very strong female role models, and I certainly did. My mom was very strong, and I had two older sisters, Diane and Lorna, and I had my aunt, Auntie Catherine, who lived nearby, and my grandmother lived nearby as well. And so I had all these strong women in my life, and I was very, very fortunate to have that. And when I wrote The Chain, I wanted it to be a story of this incredibly strong woman who does everything that she can to protect and save her daughter, and she doesn't realize how strong she actually is. And I love that sort of idea. And then with The Chain, let me see if I can get the light on here. Oh, that didn't work. I'll turn the overhead light on. Hold on 1 second. The sun's setting as we speak.
Yeah, and I just noticed it started getting dark as you said that.
How's that?
Yep. No, that's good. And
yeah, the sun is setting in New York City. So yeah, I never absolutely, under no circumstances, wanted to write a sequel to The Chain. There's never ever going to be a Chain 2. The book has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I love the ending. Some people didn't like the ending, but I did. I just liked the way it ended, and I didn't want to continue that story ever. But as I was thinking about The Island, I thought to myself, this is a kind of thematic sequel to The Chain, because the themes are very, very similar, and there's echoes of in the stories, and it's about except it's a little bit more complicated this time, because it's a woman who doesn't really want to be a mother, and is even more kind of marginalized and ignored, and then comes into her power as the story goes on. And I don't want to do spoilers, but sort of the marginalized outsider who's kind of ignored or even treated with condescension or contempt kind of becomes the central protagonist of the book.
I love the way that we learned more about her as a younger woman and a girl, and how she's effectively harking back on the lessons she's learned in life to survive. And
but I always love that concept. I was thinking about this just a couple of days ago. I was thinking, why do I prefer Miss Marple to Poirot? And the reason I do is because Poirot, he always has to overhear things. Like he's on a ship and the door's open and he overhears a confidence. And there's always coincidences where he overhears something or there's something happening. Whereas, and all those coincidences build up and he gathers the information. Whereas Miss Marple, it's a lot more devastating, because Miss Marple's this older spinster who everyone just ignores and just doesn't even, so they'll openly say stuff in front of her because she doesn't matter. She absolutely doesn't count. And what they don't realize is that she's got the biggest brain in that room. In fact, she's got the biggest brain in that village, maybe even the biggest brain in all of England. And, it's kind of like Columbo as well. They have completely underestimated her, whereas no one underestimates Poirot because he arrives advertised as the world's greatest detective, whereas Miss Marple, she's just this minor character on the edge of the frame, this old unimportant spinster. And I wanted to take that kind of model for Heather in the book. Here's this minor character, not important, on the edge of the frame, treated with, and then everyone eventually grows to respect her. Maybe even fear her.
She grows these heroes as the book goes along. It's really well done. Now, look, we've got some questions here that have come from the audience, and I want to rip through them. So we've got a little bit of time left. So let's see if we can whip through them all. It's been a while since we've seen Sean Duffy. Do you miss writing him? Will he be back, or is this a new?
No, he'll definitely be back. I mean, I love noir, as you know. It's my vice. I write those books for free. Well, I effectively did for 5 or 6 years. So he will absolutely be back. I've written a 7th Duffy novel, and I've got plans for an 8th. So hopefully the end of this year. I mean, that's what I said last year, and then COVID came along and knocked everything out. So hopefully the end of this year, touch wood, cross fingers. There'll be a Duffy novel along.
So that's the next one. That's the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Cool. That's all right. Well, look, if you've got any plot issues, call Shane. He'll deep into he'll delve into that brain of yours and
Yeah, absolutely.
Another one. Do you prefer writing series to standalones? What are the pros and cons of each?
Oh my God, I love standalones. Oh, I love a standalone because there's so much potential for it all to go wrong in the final couple of chapters. Everyone could die. Just a lot of those models, a lot of my early sort of models are those 70s films, right? And just those horrible, in Britain they were called video nasties, and these 70s model, films like there basically the way the rating system worked in the UK, there was like U, and then there's like PG or whatever, and then X rating was the highest rating you could get. And then there were those films that were uncategorizable. They refused to release them. They wouldn't give them a rating, and they went straight to the video shop. And as kids, we all wanted to watch those, and they were called the video nasties. And the thing about watching those video nasties, I Spit in Your Grave, Last House on the Left, and Texas Chainsaw, you just never knew how they were going to end.
Yeah.
You're just going, this is horrific. Is anybody going to live at the end of this bloody story? And sometimes they wouldn't. And you just go, my God, this is horrific. And that's what's so delicious about writing a standalone, is that you don't owe anybody anything.
Yeah.
And you're not ready, because everybody knows that Duffy's going to live presumably to the next book. Everybody knows that Reacher's going to live to the next book. Whereas in a standalone, all bets are off. Anything could happen, and the last chapter could be this nihilistic bloody nightmare where everyone dies. And I always loved it. Remember, did you ever see Casino? Martin Scorsese.
Cracking.
I love the bit where it's not De Niro, it's Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
He's murdered in mid-narration.
Yeah.
So he's narrating this encounter in a cornfield, and in mid-narration, he gets murdered. You're just going, that's great. That's those nihilistic, crazy endings.
Yeah, you get to surprise the reader and surprise yourself. It's almost like, you're meeting new people. You're walking into your favorite pub for the first time again, Yeah,
exactly.
But so look, one other question, because people are always, keen to know, and I am too, actually. What are you reading at the moment? What authors have grabbed your eye?
Hold on, I'll see what's on my shelf right behind me. I'm reading. Oh, okay. I'm reading. It looks like I'm reading. I'm in a bit of an obscure mood at the moment. I'm reading this French novel by an author called Anne Sayre, and it's called The Fool and Other Moral Tales. It's filthy. It's absolutely filthy. If this were an English author, if this were an English, Australian, or American author, there would be protests outside her house. But because she's French, she can get away with this stuff. But it's outrageous. The French, thank God for the French, but also the French. What are you guys doing? The Fool and Other Moral Tales.
And they've got an amazing rugby team right now as well. It's just
they do.
Go on.
And I'm reading this. It's a novel. Doesn't sound like a novel, but it is. It's called I Hate the Internet by Jarrett Kobach, and it's about the comic book industry in San Francisco. And finally, I'm reading a history book. This is the third one of it's called The Guns That Last Light, and it's about the campaign from the invasion of Normandy all the way up to Berlin.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Well, Adrian, it's just been a great fun talking to you. And
it was my pleasure, entirely my pleasure.
And just as much fun reading The Island. And I'd encourage all you out there to go and buy it. It's a thrilling ride, but look, clear your schedule, because when you start, you're going to have difficulty stopping. So enjoy it. But well done, Adrian, and really nice to meet you over Zoom.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute joy. Next year in person, can we all agree on that?
Can I say yes, since it's my job? I have to say, I'm so sorry to come back, because I was just saying to Selena offline, we could be here for days and I would just sit here, we may have other lives, but who cares? I think this is one of those interviews that people are going to listen to again and again. So, I didn't say it would be funny, and I had no idea about the digressions. I mean, we have been everywhere. That story about Muhammad Ali.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry too.
Wow.
I was having too much fun.
I know. And the description of the writing processes of other writers. Elroy really must have a very good typist, or very good kind of decipherer.
A patient typist, I think.
And a strong wrist.
And a very strong wrist, yeah. Look, the underestimated hero or heroine, the description of noir versus thrillers. There was so much in this. Thank you so much. And please come for the festival next year and just stay for a long time.
I will stay and never leave. That's going to be the trouble.
Yeah, and I don't know, Sydney's a pretty good city as well as Melbourne. I like Melbourne. Much more civilized.
Almost as great as Melbourne. Almost as great as Melbourne.
In a very different way. You know, like we could have that pub conversation. It was good.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely could.
But please, let's not set the festival on an island. I'm not ready.
No. No islands. Absolutely not. So look, if you don't yet have your own copy of The Island, go and get it, go and read it. And in fact, read everything, I think is the general message here, because you're going to get so many different things from the different books. So look, next week, we stay in the US and we're talking to Jana Ivanovic, who has set her latest series in South America. So hey, we're a bit more travel, a bit more international. You can go to BAD to book your tickets. And in fact, Don Winslow's appearing the following week or the week after. And we'll ask him that story from his point of view. It's always good to have different points of view. So that's going to be lots of fun. I know that everybody will have enjoyed this as much as Tim and I have. Thank you so, so much. And next year in Sydney.
Absolutely.
Thank you
guys.
both of you. Fantastic.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.